Hello and welcome to the second part for the calculator app tutorial. Today we're going to be focusing on specifically the logic behind the app. In our last video we went over basically building the UI design, and now we can get started on the logic itself to make sure that we actually do anything that makes sense in relation to the calculator itself. So to start off with, I'm going to create a function. And we can say that it's void for now. Void, let's say calculation. And we're gonna let it take a string, and let's call it text, I guess. And that's gonna be the text, or rather, the Unicode for the corresponding button that the user clicks on. So yeah. So what we're going to do here is we're going to call a set state, which is a function that you can call within stateless widgets, or sorry, stateful widgets. And we call this to let Flutter know that there has been some state that has actually changed within the state of the widget itself. So in this case, we're doing this because we want to make sure that the text that's displayed on the calculator actually ends up being like displayed onto the thing itself, onto the app itself. So what we're going to start with is a switch case, and I like to use this because it lets me basically pass in the text value, and then based on the actual case we can say, okay, do XYZ. Okay, so let's start with C, and C is like the clear whatever's in the text itself. So in order to do that, we need to actually have some text value that's also kept track of. If you notice right now, what we're using is just 0, 0, right? So what we should do is create two strings within the state itself. So string, and let's call this call it input. Set it equal to an empty string, and then string output equals to another empty string, and then we'll have a last string equation is equal to an empty string again. And so here what we're going to do is change this to input and change this to output. There we go. And since these are not actual constant values, we can change remove this const here from the text, but then the text style is still constant, so we're gonna add constant there. From there, what we can do is actually let's change the input to 0, and excuse me, let's have the output just be empty, so we can do that. I'll start running the emulator while we do this. So what we can do next would be to actually say, okay, if I click on C, what I want to do is set the input equal to an empty string, right? And what I also want to do, or rather, I want to set the input to 0, right? Because we're just resetting everything. But then I want to set the output to like an empty string, because that way it doesn't display anything. And the equation, we're not going to really deal with the equation right now, but yeah. But let's just add the equation in anyways. Set the equation equal to an empty string. And then notice we put a break here. That's usually important. We always want to make sure you put a break if you're not returning something within a switch case. That way it knows not to like go on to the next case if for whatever reason it does. What is this? Cannot connect. But the thing's right here. Still loading. Okay. Cool. So we can have another case. And then for that case, we're gonna have a break as well at the end. Our next case will be this. And this is basically the backspace button that is placed right next to the clear button. And so what we would do is something like if output is not empty. So this is saying if output is not empty, then we can reset the input. So I'm just going to copy this actually and do that. And then we can do like an else, And in the else, we're gonna do input equals input dot length, or sorry, input dot substring, and then we do input dot length. Is the end. We start at 0. So the idea here is you're creating a new substring from an input that goes from the beginning to one less than the length of the string. That's technically backspacing, right? And then you're setting that to the actual input value. Then we also do if input equals an empty string. So if for whatever reason we end up creating, like, say for example I have 10, right, and then I backspace 1 and then I backspace another, now I have an empty string. If that happens, then we set the value of input to 0. Oh, whoops, that would be a string 0. Yeah, so that's our second case. Then we have another case, and I should have here. So, and our next case would be this. And this is basically the equal sign. So in the equal sign, what we're gonna do is we're gonna say, oh, whoops, equation equals input. Then we do equation equals equation dot replace all. And we're gonna replace all of these with division. And the idea is like, basically this, if you didn't notice, this is the Unicode for the division symbol that we have in the app itself. And we're just going to duplicate that and change this to D7 for the multiplication sign and change this to star. Now the reason I'm doing this is because I'm going to be using a package, and that package allows me to make any kind of mathematical equation and solve it. And so in our case, or in this case, it requires you to use slash and star, but that doesn't really look as good in a UI design perspective. That's why we use the Unicode, and now we just have to convert it into the slash and star. Okay, from there, let's go to our pubspec.yaml so that we can add the actual package. And the package is called math expressions, and we're going to use 2.3.0. So once you do that, hit Control S, and VS Code should automatically get that running. But if for whatever reason it doesn't, then what you can do is you can go here, open your terminal, run flutter get, and now it should have the new package just installed. And so what we do from here is we create a try catch. And within that, we're going to do this. We're going to create a parser. And parser is from the math expressions. So we're going to call that P equals a parser. And then we're going to create an expression, which also comes from the math class, or the math expression classes. Call this exp equals expression. Or rather, we're going to do p.parse. And what are we going to pass in? We're going to pass in the equation. After that, you have to create something that's called a context model, which is called cm equals context model. And we say output equals, do this, the $sign. And the idea here is we're basically saying we want to pass in some variable into the string. So it's similar to, so it's like string, kind of like string manipulation. We're just passing in a variable into a string, and we want to be able to access certain values of this variable. For example, we can do like exp.toString, right, or something else. In this case, what we're going to do is exp.evaluate, and what we're going to do for the type is pass in evaluation type.real, because that's what we're going to do. And the context is going to be this context model that we created already. So that's our output. And if it catches this, what we're going to do instead is say output is equal to error. That way, if there is some error in parsing the actual data, we can just say that there was an error in the thing. So for the next case, we can do the division and multiplication. But what I'm going to do is something like this. And the idea here is we're basically passing it down so that it goes from it will basically get to this case and say that, okay, I am doing the division unit code, right? So what am I supposed to do? Oh, well, there's nothing there and there isn't a break either. So I'm going to go follow whatever the next case says. Even though this isn't my case, I'm just going to follow the next case and do whatever the next case tells me to do. But the next case, we're not going to put anything in here either. We're just going to do this. And then we're going to do plus. And then we're going to do another case. This one's going to be minus. And I think here now we can do let's do a break here. Oh, actually I forgot we could do one more case, and that was the caret. Okay, so here's what we're first gonna do. We're gonna say if output dot is not empty, then do the following. So the idea here is I have some output value. For example, I've done 2 plus 2, and I've hit enter. I've gotten my value of 4 in my output value, or my output variable. Right, so from there, what if I want to multiply that value by 2? I'm going to press like the multiply sign, right? So that means I have some value in my output and I press multiply, so that means it's going to do this. So then I want to do input equals output plus text. The text is the actual value that, you know, they clicked on, because in this case we don't actually know what the value is, because it could be any one of these. Okay, so what we can do next is say else input plus equals. That basically just adds whatever the text value is to the string. And then lastly, we have, the default value. Okay, so in here, we're gonna say if output is not empty, then we do the following, which is if input dot, or sorry, int dot try parse. Say input and one equal to, or rather, sorry, is equal to null. Never. So the idea here is when you have int try parse, what it does is it tries to parse this text into an integer, and if the input of the integer is parsable, then it will give you just, you know, whatever the int is. But if it isn't able to parse it, for example, you have a letter in there, or in our case we have some like random Unicode values such as like the star or the slash, or sorry, the plus, or the multiply and the divide Unicode, or the plus minus, the caret, those types of things which can't be actually created or created into like, or converted into ints, then it's going to return null. So if this is equal to null, that means that we do have some of those things in there. And what we want to do then is set the input to add the actual text value that's being passed in. And so, and just in case, set this output value to an empty string. So the reason we're doing this is like, this statement here tells us that we know there is some kind of operation happening, and then we want to add whatever value that is at the end to the end of the string itself, and that value being like whatever we clicked on. Then we can have an else statement. Sorry. Then we can have an else statement, and in that else statement we can say input equals text itself. So in this case, we're basically saying that if there is no operation happening, then you can just add the value to the text as usual, or you can set the value to the text as usual. Then what we're gonna do is say else if input equals 0. Then what we can do is say like, this is basically saying that the output is empty, and then we're saying like, okay, my input is 0. So then what I do is I just do input plus equals text, same as before. Sorry, no, you would just do equals text. And if that's also not the case, then we can do input plus equals text. So here what we're trying to do is like, okay, if I have 0 already and it's only 0 as my input, then I'm gonna be like, okay, when I press 1, I'm not gonna say 0 1, I'm gonna say 1 as like the input value. And so that's why we just set it to the text value itself. And then else is you're just adding the next value onto it, so it works fine. Now there is one more thing that we can do, and that is the plus or minus button thing we have here. Yep. Might as well copy that while I'm at it, and I'll add this above the default. So if it wasn't obvious, the default case is just like what the default will be, and in our scenario that would be like the numbers 1 through 9. Those would be our default case. Okay, so now we're gonna do a similar thing to what we did before in the default, where if and try parse, we're gonna try and parse to see if this is having any special characters in it. And if it doesn't have any special characters, then what we're gonna do is we're gonna say input, or sorry, we're gonna do int index equals input dot last index of, and we're gonna pass in reg xp. So the idea here is like you pass in some kind of pattern, and it's going to return the last index of where that pattern gets matched. And for our case, we're going to pass in some rejects. And when you're dealing with rejects, you always want to place R first and then your quotation marks in Flutter. And so then whatever your rejects is, you're going to put that inside this string. And so in our case, we're going to have something like this. And what this reject basically does is checks whether you have a plus minus that is in your thing. It's in your string. So now what we do is we check again, and we're going to use try parse again. This time, instead of indexing into input.length, we're going to index into index itself. And here what we're going to do is another switch case. We're going to pass in input, and we're going to index into the index for the input. And now we have multiple cases. We have the plus case, we have minus case, we have these cases here. And since these are the only 4 cases that we can have, we don't need to have a default. So from here, what we can do is say, we're going to say input equals input dot replace all, or no, replace range. And the start would be the index, the end would be the input length, and the replacement will be whatever we actually replacing, right? In our case, we're going to do something like this. We're going to do a minus, and then we're going to pass in input dot substring index or sorry, +1. And this should be a plus, but no, minus, so plus there, and then essentially the same thing, except now here we're going to make this a minus. So to make sure you're following, what we're checking here is that if the last character in the input is not null, that means it's not an operator, and if the last or the value before the index is not an operator, then what we do is we find, or we replace whatever the index value was with the corresponding operation, and then we have like a substring that goes from the value after the index all the way to the end of the index string itself. So we have just substring index +1. So let's say, for example, I have 1 + 2 + 3. Then I find the index gives me the last index where I have a plus. So 1 + 2 + 3 is the 4th index, or sorry, 3rd index. And so my index is going to be 3, and then I'm going to replace 3 and 4 with plus, and then whatever comes after. So I'm just adding a break here because I noticed that there was an issue with that. Okay, and then for these, what we're gonna do is say something like, probably just copy this. Like so. Then we're gonna change this to index plus 1. We're gonna make this a minus. So minus this. So. And then for the first if statement, we're gonna say else. Oh, sorry, not the first one, but the second one. So this. Else. I'm gonna have another switch case. Input. And we're gonna paste in the same thing, except now we're gonna say. Oh wait, why is this up here? And the case here is plus. We'll have a similar one. This case would be for a minus. And let's add a break at the end. Okay, so I had some issue with my emulator, but I got it working now. I can see all of the things here, but then I realized I forgot to actually call the calculation method when we call the thing. So really quick, in your build button function, you want to have in your on pressed, you're gonna pass in the actual text that's being pressed on, right? So you would do something like that. As you can see, we can make it work now. So a plus a gives you this, and then if I do multiply, then it takes the value that's in the output times 2 equals 32 plus 5, 7 to the power of 3 divided by 9, 0, and plus 6. Right, so then times 2, but if I want to do -2, then I get -12. Minus 6. Oh wait, I want to do plus 6. That's not gonna work. What we can do instead is just do plus 6 like this, right? But then okay, let's say I want to do plus 5, but actually I want to do minus 5. Let's see, 6 plus 6 minus. Seems like it's not recognizing this. Let's see. We use this here. What do we do in our? So we do this in here as well. It is the same thing. So let's put a big thing here, see what's happening. Oh, I see what the issue is. Okay, so in this case, we don't need this ring interpolation. We just do something like this. Okay, so seems like I got some of my values wrong. So notice that if this is a plus, then you want to make a minus here. So the idea is that you're basically replacing this plus with the minus followed by whatever's after the actual input. Same with here, since this is minus, you want to have a plus here followed by whatever is after the plus sign, if there happens to be one. And then, or there should normally be one there. And then here you want to have minus and minus, and then here you want to have minus or just the actual thing, whatever comes after. And then it should work here. So if you do 6 plus 6 minus, do that times 2. I want a -2, so it's positive by 5, and it works fine. Cool. So that's about it. There's not much else left for logic. It's really just a whole bunch of switch cases, and then calling set state so that we make sure that the actual value is being manipulated and therefore reflecting that change onto the screen itself.